So the Pacific War started when Japan invaded Manchuria in 1936. The League of Nations condemned it, but they did nothing, so Japan continued invading it until Chiang Kai-shek was pushed to the west part of China and Mao Zedong started to hide. The American army was only involved when the Japanese Navy attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. From that time on, Japan was rapidly expanding and they were only stopped Papua New Guinea, a few miles from Australia. The first victory for the United States was the Battle of Coral Sea, where they stopped the Japanese forces from marching into Australia. And the first major victory of the Allies was in Midway, where they destroyed four of Japan's aircraft carriers and thus preventing any hope of a Japanese occupation of Australia. Then the Americans started to invade Guadalcanal. It was a bloody 6 months. And after they invaded it successfully, they started their island hopping campaign until they reached Leyte or Leyte in Philippine accent. This is where the largest naval battle ever occurred, and the Japanese counterattack was pushed again, and they plundered one of their remaining aircraft carriers. Then, after the Americans freed the Philippines, they marched into Iwo Jima, where it was the bloodiest battle they have in, ever marched into. And the only time it was finished is when they killed all the Japanese soldiers. The Japanese soldiers never surrendered. And when the Americans invaded Okinawa, they lost 50,000 men for only 200 kilometers of an island. And one of the major factors of losses is the kamikaze attacks of the Japanese soldiers. When the Americans realized that they could never really subdue the Japanese and they will be forced to invade the Japanese mainland and they will inflict upon themselves 500,000 casualties, they realized that it was not worth it and they just used the new toy made in New Alamo, Mexico, namely the atomic bomb, and they dropped it in Hiroshima and Nagasaki August 6 and August 9 respectively. And after that, the Japanese realized that they can never win and they surrendered. And one of the factors that they surrendered is a few weeks before the dropping of the atomic bomb, Russia started to invade Manchuria. where they destroyed four of Japan's aircraft carriers and thus